Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Joining me today is a guest making their official debut here on the channel. Now, my guest today is an award-winning and critically acclaimed science fiction author, publisher, and raconteur celebrated for his vivid storytelling and unique blend of sci-fi, humor, and social commentary. Known affectionately by his friends as McScifi, my guest has carved a niche in speculative fiction and works that challenge conventional narratives while exploring complex characters and futuristic worlds. His bibliography includes standout titles such as the Brittle Riders trilogy, a post-apocalyptic saga hailed for its originality and depth, and Goptri of the Mist, which captures his trademark mix of wit and world building. Beyond his novels, my guest has contributed to comics and graphic novels such as Legends Parallel and Marcie's Marvels, bringing his creative voice to dynamic visual storytelling. A tireless advocate for indie publishing and innovative collaboration, my guest frequently appears at conventions, panels, and events, sharing insights and connecting with fans. When he's not crafting new tales, he's an active force in the literacy and entertainment communities, blending his passion for sci-fi with a commitment to fostering emerging talent. With a knack for weaving humor and humanity into high-concept stories, my guest continues to captivate audiences, leaving a lasting mark on the science fiction landscape. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest, Mr. Bill McScifi McCormick. Bill, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Gabriel. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, Bill, and I must say, quite the pedigree, quite the bibliography. You have been busy, sir.
Well, my publisher and I were talking about this. I've been voted Science Fiction Author of the Year 3 times in 2 different categories. My book, The Brittle Riders, is being picked up by Perspective House Films to be developed into a movie. I've got critical acclaim from guys like Garrick Dion, who's one of the biggest Hollywood producers out there. Gave me a 5-star review and wrote the blurb for the back of the book. He loved it so much. So we actually reprinted the book just so we can put that blurb on there. Have that out there. People like this stuff. We're Azoff Chem, my publisher, they're a smaller company, so it isn't like I'm not competing for anyone. I'm not competing on the bestseller list. But people who read it like it, and then they tell their friends about it, and then their friends tell 2 friends, and it's just been going like that. Brittle Riders was banned, and now I'm officially banned in Russia and China because it promoted equality, racial equality, LGBTQIA plus pro themes, and it was against dictators. I can't imagine why Russia would be anti-dictator, but there they are. They don't like that. So you can't buy my stuff in Russia or China unless you know there's this guy in Slovenia who set up a pathmark that people in the underground know that they can go and get a PDF from him and read it. So I let him do it. I know he's probably making $1 a crack at it. He's not getting rich, but he's getting my work out there in countries there I'm completely banned. So I feel very subversive, going against the underground like that. It's very cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's kind of fun. And yeah, you mentioned the comics. I got one that I'm really proud of. It's called Safarchek. It's a story about a woman trapped inside a man, a god trapped inside a body. When I was mentoring some transgender teens, at-risk teens, they helped me put together the plot. So it's about a transgender superhero and her adventures or her actions in the world at large. And because I'm a dick, I put her in Russia. So I can piss off everybody over there because, that's the kind of guy. Excuse me, that's the kind of guy I am. Because it's illegal for her to be transgender over there because they're so open and caring. So I put her there, and everyone thought that was fun. So we got that, and I got another one that I wrote called Bob Sins of the Sun, which is a story about the son of death who becomes a superhero in Chicago, even though his brother and his sister and his dad don't want him to. They just want him to be death. But
right.
That opens up a whole bunch of questions like who's mom, and that's a whole part of the story that I don't want to give away. By the book, you'll find it out yourself. But it's some fun stuff. I like writing. As you gathered, I write a lot of stuff. And,
right.
And Goptri of the Mist. What's fun about that is I've written the Brittle Riders. And then a gentleman, Imam Muhammad, he read it and he loved it. And there's a Muslim character in there, which he thought was great, that I thought it was handled well and everything. And if you're getting an okay from an imam, you're on the right path there, especially when you're dealing with Muslim characters. And he said, I wish you could reset all of this in India and so on, and, Pakistan, and just have it all flourish over there. And so, because I had absolutely nothing better to do in my life, I sat down, I wrote like 40 or 50 pages. And I looked at it and I said, this isn't half bad. So I sent it to him. I said, if I take this and go with it, what do you think? He said, I bet you can get a book out of it. And he was right. I got 3. Became a trilogy. The last one is currently on its way to the printer as you and I are speaking.
Wow.
So, there's the Brittle Riders, and then there's Goptri of the Mist, and they're set in the same universe. And I always thought you had to read the Brittle Riders to understand Goptri. But we learned that was not true when Amazon, for some reason or another, released Goptri in southern India, but not the Brittle Riders. So people over there were reading it and liking it and understanding it. And I'm like, well, they don't know any of this other stuff, and they're still getting it. So go ahead, just read the damn thing, and it's fun. So, and it's cool too to tell people they don't have to read all 6 books. You can read 3 or, do whatever you want. Makes it a little less of a commitment on the reader.
Absolutely. So I'm very curious, Bill. You've written quite a lot of incredible stories, all dealing with different themes and social commentary. How did this passion for storytelling come about? Can you explain sort of like that aspect of you?
Well, I was in the music industry for a long time, so songwriting and storytelling through that, something that I've been around all my life. And I wrote nonfiction for magazines, and I wrote nonfiction thing for a thing called World News Center that was part of the Fox Sports Radio thing called The Big Wake Up Call, hosted by a gentleman named Ryan Gatenby. And I was there for 12 years, writing stories and stuff and bringing people into it. And that ended, and I had a job that ended, and my marriage ended. And it was like, call it the same week, if everything's going to go bad, have it all go bad one time.
Wow.
And the only thing that actually kept going was radio show. That lasted a little while longer. But so I had all these fictional stories that I tried writing and I played with and I'd done stuff with. And I just started writing them, just get them out of my head. It was like demons in my head. I just had to get them out. And in 2011, a company called Bewildering Stories, with big West Coast magazine, if you ever look them up online, it's a lot of fun. They picked up a story. Actually, they rejected a story I'd written called Vorbliss. And Don Webb, the head editor out there, wrote me a 2-page rejection letter. I mean, he went into detail. And basically came down to this. This is the funniest, most amazing thing I've ever read in my life, but I will get fired the second I put this in. He goes, my boss is a Christian, and you've got a nun with an amazing ass. We cannot have that in my magazine.
Wow.
So he goes, do you have anything else? So I sent him this thing called And the Beat Goes Fucked, spelled P-H-U-T. And it's about kickstarting the apocalypse by getting rid of all automated things, like automated cars, self-driving planes, self-driving everything. Had it all disappear in one day. And people, of course, the whole world collapsed and went into the dark ages. And I set the whole thing in a bar with a DJ. It's like all reactionary. It's a very strange story. It's fun. And he loved it. And they printed it. And it was supposed to come out on 9/11 in 2011. So that would have been on the 10th anniversary of one of the biggest days in American history. And I had a story about being a terrorist coming out. So someone in their legal department went, no. And they moved the release date back to November, so it wouldn't be such a in-your-face kind of thing. No much. Anyway, but it came out and people liked it, and I started sending them more stuff, and other companies started asking for stuff, and it was very organic. I just kept writing, and people kept sending me money, and I said, I can do this. So here I am.
Wow. And what would you consider your aha moment when you realized you wanted to transform your passion for writing and storytelling into a business, a career, and to build your brand?
That came in 2019. I was working for a company that I liked. There's no animosity or, I hate those people, blah, blah. I liked them. But I was starting to make money, writing. And I just scored a gig writing for a film company, writing a script for a film company. It was pretty decent money. But to do that, I couldn't do my job. So I talked to my wife about it. It was like the pay was about the same. But I talked to my wife about it, and I'm like, where do we go here? And we talked about it, we prayed about it, and we discussed it. And we're adults, And he's like, gotta be, jump off in the unicorn and fairies, So we talked about it, and I said I was going to give it a shot and see what happened. And here I am, 2025, still doing it.
Nice. Awesome. That's incredible, Bill. That is incredible. And when I had a chance to look at your website and really read your stories, I can definitely tell that these stories, as you said before, and also in your bio, that there's nothing like them. The Brittle Riders, your other works, they are completely original, which I absolutely enjoy. So now let's talk about your writing process. So when you began writing, let's start with the Brittle Riders. When you began with that project, what were the goals you had going into the Brittle Riders as the author, but also understanding the promises you're making to your future readers?
Several. I wrote out a preface of what I thought the Brittle Riders could be. And there's a lot of backstory there. I won't waste your time with it, but I had this preface. And I decided to see if it could be real. And to do that, I took theoretical geneticists and military people to dinner and brunch and picked their minds. Can I do this? Is this possible? The scariest moment in this process is when I took a theoretical geneticist up and I was explaining about how I wanted to do the chromosome count in the chimeras. And they went, oh, no, that's right. That's how you would have to do it. No, I don't want to hear that you're doing this now. No. Wrong answer there. But I met with a lot of people and they gave me some very good advice. And so when I started writing a story, I had a background of, like, for the military stuff, I learned that if you talk to combat nurses, that's where you write your military stuff, because they see what the bullets do. They see what it's like on the field of action. They don't have this high-minded ideal. They don't, and we're going off with our flag. Da, da, da. They're pulling bodies off the floor. Excuse me. And so you get a grittier, more real look at things. And so that transferred into my books. And if I had that kind of realism in my stories, then I could get very real about the science in it. And it did. And once I had those base aspects down, now I could tell the story I wanted to tell. I could, what I wanted to do with the Brittle Riders was dissect society. I wanted to see the banker people over here, the agricultural people over there, the technical people. I wanted to pull it all apart because it's all woven together right now. And I wanted to pull it all apart and see what is the positive aspect of this and what is the negative aspect of this. And I wanted to be able to do it step away so it didn't come off like some sort of political screed. And I wanted to be able to do that. And obviously it's pretty successful because they're going to make a damn movie out of it. So
right.
So, somebody likes it. But it's one of those books. It's like superficially, it's got a lot of violence, it's got some sex, and it's got a lot of booze, because I couldn't write a book without booze. But it's also got a lot going on underneath. It's got a lot of social commentary. It's got a lot of can you understand this? Can you believe this? Can you take this with you? And that general philosophy colors all my writing. Whether it's my short stories, my long stories, my books, my novels, my comics, I try to make it as believable as possible, and I also try to make it as pointed as possible to make some sort of commentaries.
Awesome. And after you wrote the first draft of the Brittle Riders, what was the overall reaction like from friends and family who learned of this?
Well, my family, I don't really have any family. My friends, I had a friend at the time. She's a lovely lady. We're still friends. I went to her wedding. She's a wonderful stand-up woman. I let her read a first draft of it. And she went, this is great. No one will publish it, but it's great. And I remember her saying that. Now, it's years ago, obviously it got published. But years later, I was talking with Garrick Dion, the producer I mentioned. And he goes, the good news is you've created something amazing and unique. Goes, but this is Hollywood. So the bad news is you've created something amazing and unique.
Right.
They want reissues and stuff like that. And this ain't it. And when Perspective reached out to me, I was expecting one of these more, how do you put it, more BS things with like, well, we're going to get together and get the gang and, blah, 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 blah. No, they hit me up with, they had a proposal of exactly how much money they wanted to spend, how much money we could look at to actually make, and why they wanted to do it. And the why was what made me say, okay, let's do this deal. They'd read the book, all of it. Not just the promotional materials, not just this or that, because Hollywood people, I've learned people don't actually look at the book. They look at the promo reels, they look at this, they look at that. They don't look at the book. Which is why, you know, you go to the Stage 32 or Voyager, all these places, Catalyst, they have all these tools you can use to tell people about your book without actually having them read the book.
Right.
And I had all those materials, but these guys went, yeah, those are nice, but they read the book. And they knew about the book. They understood the book. And they understood that there's a whole other world out there, but they're going to focus on this book, one. If we can get this going, then we can do the whole world, but we're not going to go down that road until we get one done right. And I like that. I like that focus. I like that commitment to this one. We're going to do this one, and we're going to do it right.
Well, that's really good to hear, Bill. And that is incredible. And also, you know, congratulations on that. Is a huge, huge achievement to actually see your project be adapted to the big screen, which I know a lot of us independent creators, that's probably like one of the many dream goals, is to have our work adapted to reach new audiences, new people. So my hat's off to you, Bill. So with all that said, looking back from that moment to now, would you feel that your promise and your goals has been validated from the outpour of, you know, positive feedback and just, you know, the great response that you've gotten?
You know, I have a therapist, so that's why I'm not good with validation, self-validation. I'm very bad with it, which is why I have a therapist. But yeah, in a sense, it's good to see people like it. Had some random guy on the internet the other day ran into a post of mine on Facebook, and he posted underneath. He goes, "I read your book. This thing's amazing. You're a great writer." And he goes, "And I'm a professional editor who works with blah 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 blah, big names." I'm like, why don't you put something on Amazon and tell people I'm great? You know, not on Facebook. You know, but whatever. It's reassuring to know that what I write resonates with people. You know, we shall see.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into another question. This one's a more personal one, a reflective question, which I'll give context to this one, Bill. As I'm sure you would definitely agree, you know, as independent authors, independent creators, we imprint a little bit of ourselves into our work, because it is, especially if it's our first work, it is our baby. It is something that we have worked on many hours, many a night, struggling, trying to get to the best version that it can be. And when we share it with others, especially now in the digital age, it's a double-edged sword, because yes, social media allows independent authors and creators to reach more people. But on the other side of the coin, we do unfortunately leave ourselves exposed to spam, trolls, hate speech, the works. And especially now with social media, that could be detrimental to an author's mental health, as well as imposter syndrome, impacting whether or not we should continue down this road and everything else that goes along with it. So I'm curious, Bill, when you began this journey of yours, did you have those moments of heightened anxiety and or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue writing and to write different stories with different characters set in different worlds, but still staying true to your personal goals as an author?
Several answers there. First of all, I still suffer from imposter syndrome. That's seek therapist rule number one. I think I was kind of prepared for this. I used to work, like I said, I worked for Fox Radio, and I was a liberal. I still am. So I actually, one time when I went to a meet and greet for the station, I had this guy go, "Oh, you're that libtard I listen to on Fridays." I'm like, "Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you." I did a thing with the NRA, not against the NRA, with the NRA on gun control, and I got hate mail in all caps. You know, it's like, these guys are on your side. We're trying to figure this out. You know, we're trying to set something straight up. So I guess I'm so used to getting that kind of level of hate anyway, that now it's kind of like water off a duck to me. It's like, oh, you don't like it? Gosh, golly. I guess I'll have to go have tea. No, never mind. I got tequila. I'll have that instead. I don't let it bother me, you know. Hate are going to hate, you know.
Right.
You know, I look at the people who are impacted by my stuff. There's a lady in Rostov, Russia, who bought my book illegally. And she wrote me a paragraph. It's up on the website. If you go up to the Ace Academy website, you'll see it. It's right up there. But she's like, I understood this book it's almost like at the molecular level. She got it, the rebellion and how the leadership should go. Why all humans should be killed. She got it all. She understood all of it. And she felt that I was talking to her, you know. And in a similar vein, when I was first starting out, I was at a convention, and this black lady kept coming up, and she looked at me, back and forth, 4 or 5 times. Finally, she walks up and she goes, "Where's Bill McCormick?" I said, "I'm Bill McCormick." She goes, "No, you're not." "Yeah, I am." And we go back and forth. I show her my ID, my driver's license, my business card, the book. It's got my picture on the back, you know, me, Bill McCormick. It's me. She goes, "I'll be damned." She goes, "I've read a bunch of your shorts." She goes, "I just assumed you were a black lesbian like me." That is the highest compliment I could ever get paid. I resonated so deeply with her that she couldn't imagine anyone other than a black lesbian writing those stories. And to me, that's the biggest compliment anybody could give me.
Wow, that is quite the compliment. Holy mackerel. And that's another fun question I want to ask you, Bill, because I've been asking a lot of my guests this recently, and I'd love to hear their thoughts on it. And to give context to this question, a previous guest of mine posted this on her social, and she made the argument that during the 4 years of quarantine, 4 years of lockdown, a golden age emerged for independent creators, which is like authors, artists, musicians, etc. And I've been asking my guests what are their thoughts on this. Now, some have argued that a golden age did emerge during the quarantine and lockdown. Others argue that a golden age was on the rise, just quarantine sped it up. And then I've had people say that we're not in a golden age, but we are still on that path. For you, Bill, where do you see this golden age, or is there a golden age of creators?
No, I don't think there is, or at least not now. The pandemic freed everybody up to say, I can do this too. And there's this deluge of materials that came out. And a lot of it was crap because people were doing it. I worship my craft. I write it. I edit it as best I can. Then I have beta readers go through it. Then once I have all that information, I send it to my editor, who then takes it and tears it all apart and sends me a bunch of notes, hundreds of pages of notes. Then I put all of those back into it. Then I send it to the editor again for one final gloss. And then we send it to the publisher. All of that for one book. I want, when you get one of my books, I want you to have the best experience possible. And even with that, I've had a typo get through, you know?
Right.
But I adore my craft. I consider writing a craft. Just like being a brain surgeon, just being a truck driver, like being anything. You have to learn how to do it. You can't just no one just hands you the keys and you go off-roading. You have to know what you're doing. I saw a lot of stuff in the pandemic when people were like, well, any idiot can write. And it looked like they were the idiot writing. People would send me stuff. And what was one I got? It was like, I are them with looking at that. I went, what? No, just go away. Don't give me a second sentence. I don't need the second sentence. I'm done now. And I get called elitist for that sometimes, but I'm like, it's not elite to have some pride in your work, you know?
Absolutely.
You know, I see some of these people, especially in the pandemic. One lady put out 11 novels in 1 year. I put out one in a year. Some people like Steven Spielberg, excuse me. I forgot his name now. Carrie and all that. Whatever. Anyway, he writes his novels, but he has staff to go through and keep doing stuff. So it's not just him. He gets the assembly line going, and he goes and writes the next one, so he can keep that. Stephen King, that's his name. So he can keep the machine going. But I don't have that. I've got me, myself, and I put a lot of time into my books. I put in the finishing Goptri the Mist book 3. I put 2 years into it because I didn't like the ending. Just the ending. 600,000 words. There were 14,000 at the end. I went, no, I don't like those. And I went back and recrafted the whole book so I could get to an ending I liked.
Wow.
And then when I got to the ending I liked, and I had this lady, she's a member of the United States military. She tests my stuff to make sure it's military accurate, the battle scenes are accurate and stuff like that. And so I'm not offending a members of our United States military because, I mean, Look, they're out there putting their lives on the line every day. The least I can do is give them a little pump, you know, and say, hey, we appreciate you. And so she reads this stuff for me. The amount of F-bombs that came out of her mouth when she read the end of the book, she goes, you can't do this to me. And I went, so you liked it? She goes, yeah, I liked it. She goes, God damn. But that was the ending I wanted. That was the response I wanted. I wanted you to hit the page, go the end, and go, wait, what? Like it hit you upside the head. I just wanted it to be like a slap upside the head. That it didn't just end, it hit you one more time in the head. And it does that now. So yay. But I put a lot of work into this stuff, you know, and seeing people knock out like 4 or 5 novels a year and stuff like that. I'm like, you're not putting out novels. You're putting out your notes. You're putting out your ideas. And there may be some good ideas in there. I have a buddy of mine who I was finally able to talk to, and I said, look, you wrote 3 novels in a year. I said, I'll be honest with you, because I've been reading them, going back and forth with them. I said, if you took them all apart and put it all back together, you got 1. Because 2/3 of this, they're all the same basic story. I said, change some names, you got 1 novel. The rest of the stuff is just superfluous crap. And he was mad at me, and he didn't talk to me for like 2 months, and then he called me up and he goes, damn it, you're right. You know? He's like, yeah, he goes, I get it now. I said, because you're telling a story, you know, and you can't keep going off into the weeds, for one. Like, especially with my stuff, it's science fiction. But if I spent, let's say, 3 chapters talking about how they do a chromosome count to get to a chimera, no one's going to read that. No one's going to care. But if I get to if I can say in a paragraph, this is how we got to this result, people are like, all right, they got it, they understand, and then we move on from there. In the meantime, in the background, I've done a ton of research to get to that paragraph so that it makes sense, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of work, and I love the work I do, and I love the fact that people like the work I do and enjoy the work I do. We've got a cosplay thing going on right now for people to dress up like characters in Brittle Riders, and we're going to use them as parts of advertising and things like that. Not in TV ads or anything like that, but just some social media promotion, see if people want to do it. And I've gotten some very intriguing responses, which we had to say no, thank you. But because some of my characters could be considered slightly risque, not because they're risque in the book, but because, like at the beginning of the Brittle Riders, everyone's living on the fringes. They're living on the edge. They don't have. They're making a society out of scraps. So things like body modesty, they're gone. You know, you just don't have it. You look at tribes in Africa and Brazil and South America, not just Brazil, but South America, that don't interact with cultures that much. They don't have a lot of body modesty because they have no use for it. It's something that actually would hinder them from surviving and getting food and everything else. So I took that and then wove it into the book. And then as they become more ensconced in the culture and more ensconced in civilization, they put more clothes on. The longer you know them, the more they get dressed. But when they first start out, they're dressed. Some people read that part and then they stop and they don't get the rest of it. And I'm like, no, you really need the whole thing. Otherwise, you just got somebody naked in a bar. And I mean, I've been there, you've been there. God bless. When you're young, that's what you should do. But we move on now.
Right. Absolutely. And I love actually what you said that, you know, it agrees with, not to get that head on the show, that writing is a craft and you should take pride in your writing. And he argued that for him, in his response, it was like a yes and a no. He argued yes in the sense that there is a lot more independent books out there in the market, but he also said no is because there's not a lot of creativity and heart behind some of these stories. And you're absolutely right. And, you know, for me personally, I got my craft started during, you know, quarantine and lockdown. I was still in graduate school when I wrote my first book, and I'm now on my 4th, but it's been like almost like 5 years. I've written like a book a year, and it's not easy, especially if you're an independent creator, because you have to do everything on your own. You have to have your team of editors, cover artists, and beta readers, art creators. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of managing. It's a lot of trial and error, which from that point leads into my favorite segment of the interview, which is the business side of being an author. So let's talk about that as a little icebreaker, Bill. So when you decide to publish your stories, how much research did you go into like figuring out which publishing house was the best for you that would be true to the stories that you were writing and hopefully would not ask you to censor or play down your stories?
I had submitted to several publishing houses when it first came out, like between 2014, 2015. And the consensus was, like you said, I was either going to have to play stuff down or edit it severely to make it more of a mainstream book, to make it more of a, like one company I wanted to work with, they wanted me to get rid of the politics. I'm like, that's kind of like 80% of the damn book. All you're left with is people in furry outfits walking around with spears, you know. We need a little more than that. So anyway, that was going on. And then Azoth Pen reached out to me. I'd worked with them, their publisher, Nancy Chandler, I'd worked with her before with a record company in the 90s called Delinquent Records. And we did a bunch of good records together and charted some stuff, did national tours, and we had each other's respect. And she wrote me and she said, you know, hey, buddy, I got this publishing company. We're doing a bunch of stuff. She goes, but I'm doing some other stuff and I need some sci-fi and I don't have any. She goes, do you know anyone who does? And I was sitting there looking at the Brittle Riders in my monitor when she asked. And I went, you know, I think I do.
Well,
and so I sent it to her and I wrote her, I was really honest about it. Like, here's the rejection letters I got. I just want you to know what you're getting into. So there's, you know, we're all up front with each other. And she read it and she wrote me back. She goes, these people are idiots. And as we started dressing it up and talking to bigger companies and working with different things to polish it up completely, these people are idiots. That seems to be a catchphrase because I heard it from 4 different people independently when we were getting this thing going forward. And now most people are idiots. And here we are.
wow. That is, you know, that's great. That's great that your friend pretty much told you that, you know, there was something here that, you know, people weren't only seeing on the face value, but didn't really look into the interconnected issues of your story to realize there is, you know, something good here, something original. And I'm really, really happy for you and, you know, the success that's come with it. So from that point, once you know, got started, got the ball rolling and, you know, expanded into other stories, that leads into another question or questions when it comes to the audience and the readership. So let's talk about the audience first. So for us authors, you know, we are the target audience first and foremost because we know our stories better than anyone else. But when we publish it, we really do have to consider, okay, who exactly are we marketing for? Who are we publishing for? And so forth. So we really have to ask a lot of questions. So for you, Bill, at the time when you were writing the Brittle Riders and your other story, did you have a good idea of who your audience was? And in your opinion, when should an author understand who their audience is? During the drafting phase of writing or the editing/publishing phase of the author process?
I'm going to tell you, this is true. When I was writing the Brittle Riders, I was talking with this company. A lady worked for a big publishing house on the West Coast. She was helping me with some technical stuff, you know.
Right.
They weren't going to pick me up, but she liked me and she was helping. Sometimes in life, when you're not an asshole, people will take 5 minutes out of their day to help you. And that's what she did. She and I talked and we had a couple of good conversations. And I buy her a sparkling white wine and pick her brain. And she drinks the good stuff. So don't do that a lot because you're going to go broke. But she gave me some ideas. And one thing she agreed, she goes, here's where we're at. She goes, this is going to get released. It's going to be 25-year-old to 40-year-old males with a college education. Because that's who's going to understand this. That's who's going to pick apart. And she goes, that's where we have to drive your market. This is from a woman who does this for a living. I don't want to give too much information, but she has made millions of dollars promoting books. She knows her business. She gave me this line. I took her information, gave it to my publisher. We said, great. We went forward with it. Want to know the truth?
What happened?
The average age of a Brittle Riders reader is 18. They skew 50-50 female-male. They tend to be minorities. They tend to be heavy in the LGBTQ community. I'm like 30% of my readers are in that community. I do get older readers, 25 to 40. Those guys are out there and they like it, but they're not my core. They're not the ones that are behind this whole thing. I have a friend of mine. He didn't quite understand the book. He's a scientist, but his niece, who is 19 years old, loved the book. Absolutely thinks I'm a genius. And he's like, I can't pronounce the words in it, and she thinks you're God, you know? So, and we talk, she and I, my friend and I, we talk about the story and we laugh about it. She goes, about a third of the time books are released, we have a market ready for it. Like James Patterson, he knows who's going to read his stuff all the time. Clive Cussler knew who was going to read his stuff all the time. But she goes, you're just coming out. So we targeted based on history. She goes, and then the world went in and went, no, you went over this side. He goes, you just went completely different. She goes, and that's fine, because since you figured that out, you've crafted the rest of yourself to stay with those people and stay in there, hold. She goes, that works. She goes, she goes, you're not supposed to be in that market, but you're doing really well over there, so stay there, go through that, you know? Yeah, I love it, because it's fun sometimes when I'm doing signings or stuff like that. I'll have some people walk up to me and they're like, I've got socks older than them, and they're like, dude, love your book, can you sign it for me? Yes, I can, and I will. I can even do it in purple or silver. You want a color? We'll do colors.
That's actually, amazing. That's actually really, really cool. And it's one of the main things I've learned myself, in starting my journey, is that when we think of the audience in mind, we want to target that audience. But as you just said, Bill, in your case, your audience was completely different, but it was like, this is the audience. These are the people that I need to write for, that I need to market for. And I'm so incredibly happy for you that you found your audience. So follow up to that question, in your opinion, when should an author really understand their audience, during the writing phase or the drafting phase?
I knew we were going to be different from the audience we were projected at when we got to the beta reading phase. That's really where I started to figure out who was going to like this and who wasn't. And in that phase, like I said, I had one gentleman who I know, he's 35 years old, IT guy, got 4 college degrees. He should be my target market. His 19-year-old niece, who likes music and avant-garde poetry, loved it. He didn't get it. But we started sealing that in the beta reading section. I think that's really where you get it. When I wrote this other novel, Splice, it's off the market right now, but when I wrote it to be an urban fantasy set in the urban environment and to capture what it's like to be a young black man just kicked the shit out of by society and really abused by society. Everybody who read it loved the military stuff in there. They absolutely loved it. My big readers for that book were all military. Well, that's not where my target market was. But I discovered when we were beta reading it, that's who was going to love this. They got it. I had a captain from the United States Army wrote the back cover for it. You can smell the smoke. You can smell the battle. That's how good this book is. And it, won Best Science Fiction Novel of 2020 on the Critters Reader Poll. And Critters, by the way, for those of you who don't know, that's short for book critics. They're critters. So that's where that book went. And that wasn't where I intended it at all. But there we are. I've discovered in the beta reading phase is when I really start to figure out who's doing what, who likes what, who doesn't like what, who's comfortable with what. Sometimes a scene I'll tamp it down because if it offends a lot of people, then unless I absolutely can justify it some other way, which I usually can't, then I'll rein it in. But I've had a couple of scenes that I thought were as offensive as I could get, and I've had people go, I think you need to go more.
Wow.
But that, driving home why this is such a bad thing. But the beta reading is where I learn where everything's going to go. That's where I make my home.
Interesting. That's actually probably the most different answer I've gotten to this question, because a lot of my previous guests have mentioned that it's either during the planning phase or the publishing phase, but no one's ever mentioned about the beta reading phase. But to your point, Bill, you're absolutely correct, because that's where you're really going to understand, okay, who's actually going to pick this up, like different types of people and so forth. And that, of course, leads to the readership. And in my opinion, I think the readership is more important than the audience, because it is those individual people who are going to pick up the books, pick up the stories. And in publishing, as I've learned in my research, there's like 4 big ones. There's middle grade, YA, NA for new adult, and AF. And they all have their own rules and expectations for authors who want to write stories in whatever category. Now, for you, Bill, would you agree that your stories tend to be more on the adult side? And has that been very liberating for you for the stories that you want to tell? And also, as an add-on question, has any of your fans or readers asked you to write something in the other category, let's say new adult or YA?
Yes to all of the above. For young adult and stuff like that, I do it in the comics. I'm much more comfortable doing it in that thing. I don't think I have it in me to do an entire novel in a young adult thing, because I'm gonna wander off the path. I'm an adult. I write for adults. Funny thing, when the Brittle Riders first came out, we got one of those right-wing groups of, whatever, flag wrapped in a cross or a cross wrapped in a flag, whatever they had. But anyway, they complained about my book to Amazon and wanted to take it off. They wanted it removed offline. And so Amazon actually put a human being to read it to see if they were going to have to make it 21 and up kind of thing. The guy came back and goes, no, man, it's perfect, 14 and up. So they labeled it 14 and up, told those people to go to hell, and if it worked. And my book's been there ever since. And now all my stuff gets registered 14 and up. I'm like, okay, if you say so. I would have said 16, 17, but I'm not Amazon, so
right.
But it's not for kids. No, I don't care how you cut that. How you cut that pie. My stuff is not for kids. And it's not just that there's some erotic stuff in there. There is a little bit here and there, but the violence is kind of graphic for one. And
right,
there's thematic stuff in there. Social and sexual equality. Is marriage, for example, in the Brittle Riders, I bring this up, and it's kind of an underground theme, but it courses through the book. Is marriage limited to 1 or 2 people? Can it be a larger group or a lesser group? Can it be manipulated? Is polyamory acceptable? Not something you run into in your day-to-day science fiction novel, but here we are. And just things like that I want to explore other themes. And if I'm in a YA market, I can't do that.
Absolutely.
But for the YA stuff, like Marcie's Marvels, you mentioned before, Marcie's Marvels, that's very YA, and it has a very good market there. Bob Sends It a Son runs teen. We call it 10 and up because it's got a couple of bad words in it, but other than that, that's it. Nothing they haven't heard Dad say when he's trying to do carpentry. So there's that. Alokia, the Kaiju Hunter, which is another thing. I tried my hand at a Kaiju book. People really like it. We're going to be doing another one really soon. That's all ages, So I can do it in a young adult form. I can do that in comic books because it's limited. You're doing 20, 30 pages. That's it.
Right.
So I can envision the story and keep things up. And when my brain starts to go, we could do no over here, pull it back. I can do that in short things. But when I'm writing my novels, you're right. I got to be free. I got to be free.
Right.
I want to write what I want to write. And it's funny, the shirt I'm wearing says Stuff About Things. That's a collection of my short stories. And because a lot of that stuff was written for radio programs and background for radio programs, that's actually more YA. Although there's a couple of longer form stories in there that are not. But what I did to the Archie fantasy of Archie, Veronica, and Betty and Jughead, let's just say you'll be in therapy when you read what I did to them. But for the most part, I like the ability to explore different things, and like it's not just sex. There's all sorts of things. And racial equality is a tough one to break. It's a tough one to hit in a young adult book.
Right.
So, I want to be able to address some more complex issues. What is God? Why is God? Where is God? I want to be able to deal with that head on, and you're not going to be able to do that in a young book.
Absolutely, very true. And this goes to a very long discussion I've had with a lot of guests on the show, is really understanding, the type of stories you want to write and, the themes. And there have been some authors I've had on the show who have written in YA and have touched on, these very complex themes, but they've worded in a way that their readers understand, but are not sort of blown away by the jargon, whereas other authors write for new adult and adult fiction, and they do have that creativity to showcase what they want to write and not play down to their readers. They understand that they're going to figure this out on their own. They're going to make the connections and so forth. And this sort of leads to another big question, which I like to ask my guests, which is this balancing act between an author's individuality, but also staying true to the genre that you're writing in. And what I mean by that, Bill, is one guest brought it to my attention, which is in each genre, there's an expectation of how a story is supposed to go, whether it's epic fantasy, sci-fi, thrillers, romance, fantasy, whatever. There's like a certain established style of storytelling that's ingrained in those genres. Yes, there are many books that diverge from that, but they typically tend to follow the same beaten path. And as authors, we want to, of course, showcase our individuality, but we want our stories to still feel familiar, that they truly belong to that genre that they are a part of. So for you, Bill, how have you been able to balance this, showcasing your individuality as an author through your stories, but also making sure that, it does fit into the genre that it's a part of, which is science fiction?
I don't even try. Kirkus Reviews did a review on the Brittle Riders, and they're like, it's a blend of science fiction and fantasy, and it mildly satirizes all the genres. That's me. I've kind of been a quirk in nature since I was a kid. I'm 63 now. That's a little late to be changing. It's I'm not saying I'm Popeye. I am what I am, but I don't hurt people. I like living my life. I like taking care of people. I did Sunday school, for Christ's sake, But at the end of the day, I care about telling the story, and I live for that story. I'm working on a new book now called The Darkling Wind, and I hope to have it out by next year.
Ooh, nice.
And I gave the first 50 or so pages to my publisher to see if she wanted me to go forward with it. And she was like, yay, it's not like anything else you've written either. It's something completely different. But it's what was in my head. And so I try and write what's in my head. I try and tell the story that people can understand. And yeah, there's going to be elements of science fiction and elements of fantasy in there. But I really don't consider myself a slave to the box. This is what you need for science fiction. I understand it for thrillers because there's almost a pace to it. I likened it when I was talking to a couple of writers who write regular thrillers. I said it's kind of like going to church. You have your setup, you have your big sermon, you got some stuff right before that, and then you wind it all down. There's an arc to it.
Right.
I don't follow that arc very well at all. There's a beginning and a middle and an end. But after that, what I do in those areas, down me. I'm going where I want to go. In book 3 of Brittle Riders, I wrote a 50-page preamble. Nobody does that. You're not allowed to do that. It's against the laws. Dude, I did it anyway.
That is crazy. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, because I remember this watching from your YouTube video, and I think it just kind of correlates to this, is it the first book for Brittle Riders that it's just one chapter? The whole story is one chapter.
That's correct.
That's insane. Like, I have never known any author to do that. And I also remember in your video that you mentioned, you were kind of not apprehensive, but wondering, how am I going to pitch this, to my publisher, that it's the whole story, but it's one chapter?
Yeah. I pitched it like this. when we finally got around to like, well, how are we going to separate this out into chapters? You don't have to. It already is. Book 1 is chapter 1. Book 2 is chapter 2. Book 3 is chapter 3. Beginning, middle, and end. There you go. It's done. You got your chapters. And I think she was too tired to argue with me at that point. I caught her on a day. Was like, oh, whatever. Fine, do that. And that's what it is. Book 1 sets up who the Brittle Riders are, how they come to be. Book 2 is how do they interact with the world around them. Book 3 is how does that interaction lead them to get to someplace better, someplace different, and who lives and who dies. And it covers their whole lives. And that's another thing, too. I didn't just want to have the same hero every single book. So people die in my books, because people die in the real world. And so that's an element of it that's, a little different. And yeah, but you're right. When I was first pitching it, and I remember talking to a couple of big publishers, one guy goes, "You're no different. I've read books without chapters before." And I said, "No, you misunderstand. It's not a book without chapters. The book is the chapter." He hung up on me.
Oh my goodness.
This wasn't me making some sort of art statement. This was me writing a story. That was my chapter. Sorry.
That is incredible. And honestly, it's probably the most unique story I've ever heard when it comes to, pitching a book. It's like, yeah, the chapter is like chapter 1 is book 1. It's not chapter 1 and then leading into that. It's just so incredible and so fascinating. But, as authors, we have our own different styles of writing and how we showcase that, which then leads to probably one of my favorite questions to ask my guests. And I'll give some context to this, Bill, which is I've been doing this show now for about 6 going on 7 years. And I've had the opportunity to meet authors from every walks of life. I've had indie authors, traditional authors, hybrid authors, aspiring debut, comic writers, screenplay writers who have now gone to the publishing world and so forth. And I've learned so much from so many different people. And I've come to understand, at least in my opinion, there are 2 paths for authors who go into this industry, and that is to be an author and to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the craft, the storytelling aspect. The other is solely invested in the marketing and financial aspect. But both lead to the same goal, relatively speaking, which is world-renowned fame, literacy, accepted, etc. But in this industry, as I've learned from a lot of my guests before, there is no guarantee that your first book is going to be the start of your legacy, or the first series you develop is going to be the start. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow, especially for first-time writers and authors getting into this industry with unrealistic goals and expectations. But there are exceptions to that rule, of course. In every industry, in every business, there are authors whose works or series did catapult their careers. All the power to them. But generally speaking, that's not necessarily the case. So my question to you, Bill, is, were there anything you've learned thus far in your career, the connections you've made, the people you have in your in your team? How would you help someone really understand this point that, yes, there is no guarantee? Start from the beginning of what you were saying before all of that.
I'm saying, if you have a story, write it. If you have a story to tell, tell it. If you want people to read it, get help. Don't try and do it all yourself. Is your first book going to be the one that gets you over the top? Maybe, maybe not. I know a guy, this is true. He had 6 stories he wanted to get out. He wrote them over a period of years until he got them all finished and all done together, and then released them all at once. That's ballsy. But they're good stories, so who knows? We'll see what happens. But however you're going to do it, I hate to say it takes a village, but it kind of does. You need an editor, you need beta readers, you need ARC people. You're going to need outside eyes on your product. And it's little things. I had when I was working on the first draft of Brittle Riders, I had a battle scene in there. And I had this lady a gentleman wrote me back, and he's like, all your people died. And he explained why, because I'd made a simple mistake in the layout of the battle. It was 2 sentences, I fixed it. But I never would have caught it. No matter how many times I would have edited it myself, I never would have caught that, because I didn't know. no matter how much I knew, I didn't know that. And when you get outside eyes to look at your stuff, they go, oh, don't do that. That's a bad thing. Your character will die, or all your people will die, or suddenly everyone's going to be writing rainbows, and this book doesn't need rainbows, whatever it is. Get used to it, and get used to being told, dude, this sucks. Because people are going to tell you that. And, you kind of have to go, but I still want to tell this story. So why does it suck? If someone just says it sucks and hands it to you, you can ignore them. But if they tell you why it sucks, listen right. Carefully to every word they have to say. Because that's where I've learned the most important stuff that I could learn in my life.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Like, it does take a village to grow. And a lot of my authors will definitely agree that you will need like a team, like even it's like beta readers, editors, cover artists, anyone. Like, it all takes all these different people to really bring about the best version of the book. And it will probably take, years or so. Like, I've had like one author on the show, her first book took her 6 years to do, and she was a big fan of Harry Potter and Narnia and Lord of the Rings, and she spent a long time developing her her language and so forth. And buddy, welcome back to the show. Due to technical difficulties, Bill's camera will be off for the rest of the interview, but we are almost near the end of this incredible authors interview here on the show. And me and Bill were just talking, or Bill gave his incredible answer of helping authors really understand, the business a little bit better, in the sense that it does take a village to grow and really hone one's craft. And on that topic of a village and community, Bill, are there any people you want to give a personal shout out to who have helped you on your journey to grow your brand and your career as an author?
Absolutely. I got to give a shout out to my brother, Brian Pitts, who basically took me from a very bad place and brought me back into the real world so I could write and could develop. My wife, Kim, who I remember sitting on a porch with me, listening to me tell the stories that were in my head. And she thought, oh, this guy's worth keeping. And so she did. She married me. Big shout out to Nancy Chandler from Azov Chem Publishing for believing in me and being on this incredibly weird ride as things have developed. We've done absolutely nothing according to the book. And, oh, well, here we are anyway. And there's other people, but I think those are the ones I would have to really thank off the top of my head.
Awesome. That is amazing, Bill. And as a final question to this incredible author interview, here it is. Again, with everything you have learned thus far in your career, its highs and lows, some setbacks, the obstacles, as well as the triumphs that have come from your series, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and fellow creators?
Word of wisdom. Oh boy. Keep writing. If you write something bad, don't worry about it. You can go back and rewrite it. You're not carving it in stone. It's not lightning bolts from on high. It's words on paper. Keep writing. Tell the story the best you can. Work it the best you can. Love what you do. And this is something it's a craft, but it's also a craft built on love. You can't just do it. If you think you're going to make $1 million writing a story that sounds just like last week's movie, by the time you get done writing it, that movie's forgotten. No one wants to hear anything else. So write your story. Write what's in your head. Write what's there, and do the best you can with it.
No words have ever been spoken. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to Bill McCormick for making his official debut here on the show. Thank you, Bill, so much for telling us all about your journey, your books, and the triumphs, and also the plans for the future. Now, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and talk with you, stay up to date with all of the incredible news, as well as purchase copies of your books?
Simplest thing is just go to my website, billmcsci.com. It's got all my social media links up there. It's got links to all my published books, short stories, comics. You can even buy t-shirts and hats if you're into that sort of thing. So yeah, BillMcScifi.com. Go there, have fun. I built it myself, so it's really pretty, and you can enjoy yourself.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for an amazing author's interview here on the show. And again, a huge thank you to Bill for coming on the show and telling us all about his journey and his stories. And we wish him the very best from one author to another. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time.